What?
Where are you?
What do you want?
To talk. We need to talk.
No, we don't. I'm fine. I just need some time.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Sema part 2.
Oh, sorry.
That we were just... Joseph, you look like a kamba. Kamba.
Classify him as a kamba.
Unakaa hivi.
Oh,
Meru hivi.
Kaa hivi.
Kaa hivi. Mbele Meru. Zote unafanana na kamba.
Kai.
You look like mimi nakaa mozi. You look like you can wash yourself a bit more. Kaa huko.
No, is it that they subdivided guys or they classified guys based on where they found
I think they classified based on where they found them.
Where they found them.
Which sometimes it's a problem for the pastoralists because they're always moving around, but they were probably classified at the time they were found somewhere. And then they moved, and then now they start being told, you shouldn't be here.
But I think the classification of the pastoralist was probably the most accurate.
And how do you mean? What do
In
you
terms
mean?
of lifestyle.
In
That
terms
they
of
move around.
lifestyle. Because again, what we were saying, we're told the story for the guys, the Lewis came down the Nile, Street Ward. That story is a bit tricky.
So there's a question
Which is what I'm wondering, because if you are told that this is, I mean, you guys were found over here, yeah, stay here, and then there's that thing about Nilots coming all the way this way,
And some going to, you know, the Ethiopian Lewis.
In fact, I think
There's a community.
I think it just hit me right now. The classification was in preparation for something else.
Of course it was in preparation for something else. It was in preparation for divide and rule.
Yes. Divide and rule, but also that if you guys come from here, now let's work out the agreements around the land and who owns what kind of land, and let's move these guys out of their land into somebody else's, and all sorts of things. Because before that classification, did people really know that this is our place? I know there were probably inter-ethnic clashes, particularly the warring communities.
The warring
which
communities,
still
but also the
happens today.
agrarian communities.
Yeah.
So the agrarian communities sort of settled and they farmed the land and they stayed there.
Thank you
So
for
the classification was not for our own purposes.
It was not just for
Yeah,
dividing.
it was for something else.
It was not for dividing, it was for control.
Doesn't-
What for us was culture, for India was religion.
Yeah, what will you divide people along?
Along, yeah.
Yes, so India, Pakistan, Bangladesh was basically the Mzungus divided India based on religion.
So I like
So classify these people.
Ideally,
We identify their leaders.
Please note.
We can negotiate with their leaders.
And please note.
Okay.
And please note.
negotiate with their leaders about land.
Land.
About economic resources, I think it was all
Yes.
about economics.
So
at the end of the day.
ideally, this is the thing. If you look at Britain, Britain is the size of Rift Valley.
If that, yeah.
Okay? As in, they even look the same. Okay. But
It's narrow like this.
it's like this. So the British Empire needs resources. So they go outside the world. In an ideal British situation, we would still be colonized. That's what we don't understand. Which is what now China is doing, which we need to be very careful about.
So please don't get me started about the railways as modes of colonization, not today. As in,
Okay.
but please let me go back to what
That's a very
I'm
deep point.
begging you.
Okay,
I'm
please,
begging you.
please,
That's a
please
very
forget I
good
said
point.
that for now.
That's a very deep point. That's a very deep point.
Because now, like China is now realizing, because how China has grown. If you read any economic paper on China, you'll know that China actually grew its economy when they realized we have 1 billion guys. See, we sell products to them. See, we use them to whatever. Then it got to a point now, it has figured a plateau phase where they now need more resources.
Yeah.
They need to feed their people. So they need to make more money. They need to make money to sustain that economy. So what have they done? They made deals with guys.
Okay. So identify the leaders who have power in the communities, and then work through the leaders to subdue the people
Yes.
and take
But even
control
before
of the
you do that,
resources.
give them beads.
If you ask me, that same scenario just happened, or is probably in play right now.
You're exactly right.
Because now that we are one nation state, you have someone like China who can come and strike a deal with the leaders to gain control of some resources within the country, And so the script continues.
I
But
say?
let's go back.
But I wanted to say.
Let's go back to the transition, because all this we've discussed missionaries and all sorts of
We
things.
haven't quite tackled
We haven't
mission-
yet
we
gotten
will-
to the
we will
place
get
where
to
now
mission.
we had the Mau Mau and the people fighting for independence.
But,
Now that fight for
but do you
independence.
really want to take me there? Though?
But,
Please
but
go.
we have to
Because-
discuss that, because I think that's where the
Please.
problems began.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think that's where a skewed sense of the history we learn begins.
Yes.
That
Yes.
one tribe fought for independence in this country.
True.
Okay.
Whew. Mama is very emotional for me.
Yeah.
My grandparents are Mama. Both my grandmother and my grandfather. They were detained for this.
Same.
Thank
You
you.
too?
Thank you.
Sikirwa.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you to your families for
For doing that. For the
whatever.
sacrifice.
Mine might have also fought, but no one
But no one
documented it.
documented it.
So-
So I think first of all you bring in an important point of history and who tells the history. Necessarily because our culture did not write and our people did not write. I think we all know that history is written usually by the victor or whoever writes controls history. So that the stuff that we read about ourselves in our history books is stuff that was written by somebody. For example, I think Malkiatzin, as you said, has written
No.
probably written a lot
by
of
the
history.
way, by the way, just for correction purposes, what Malkat Singh basically did was convert KIE into an examinable content.
But anyway, so what was I going to? I was acknowledging your point about fixing people to a certain locality. I think it's a powerful technique for control, right? Not only do you take communities that don't usually have that kind of tie to land, you fix them to a particular locality. You make them have relationships with this land that are so violent or important that one. When you start negotiating with their leaders, then please remember at this time, like the treaties that were being done, like the Maasai treaties, for example, and it's really interesting jurisprudence. Some of the earliest laws we have, international law that Kenya forms is the two Maasai cases about how Maasai land is signed away by brothers. But so you force them to have a connection with land, which they usually do not because they are migratory communities. They probably move from place to place. The whole land is theirs or given by God or whatever.
Yeah.
And then now you start to buy people off and give us this land and they sign.
So you
off.
identify land that is productive, and you have an economic interest in it, or there are resources in that area. And I don't even know if that was the primary cause of the colonialists. Like, I think they just came and then they found land that was better, good weather and all sorts of things, and then decide, I want this for myself. Okay? And to date, we have, descendants of colonialists who own large tracts
Of land. Yes.
that they somehow acquired.
That was acquired.
Except for
From
people
a piece of
in
land
Delaware.
that they did not. Anyway.
So, sorry. So I hear you. But one of the things that they do that I think is particularly wicked is changing how we understand land today.
Yeah.
So until this
Yeah.
point, as you had described, the community lives here. This is the
Nobody
village.
had a title. Did say
There
this is
isn't
my piece
title,
of
and
land.
in any event, title to land wasn't an individual thing. So and
It
so's
was
family,
communal,
this is so and so's family's place, or this is the land for these people and so on. Community tenure, which is something that we've sort of brought back with the new the Constitution of 2010. It's 7 years old. It's not new, but yes. So so then you do that, and you start to force people to think about owning specific pieces of land, and you start to have this sort of selfish arrangement with the land, and then because now there is this major tie to land, then we start doing what? We start
another factor.
buying and selling it.
There is
that way.
population growth.
Yes.
But guys, this is the thing. So when the Mzungu comes in, he literally buys the land from the African to develop it. Remember we said the reason he was moving to Africa, the reason he went to Australia, the reason he went to Canada was to first of all, for the survival of the British Empire, for resources. So, of course, you can't plant nyanyas to take to UK in 1935. Amen?
Yes.
Okay.
That's true.
So, so the thing is, like, to date, Australia and Canada are part of the British Empire. Okay. That was the plan.
Yeah.
That was always the plan. And you see, I thank God. Okay, I don't know whether I should say this. that we didn't get to that point where we're subdued to a point where Kenya literally became
Which is where the next story comes in.
an extension of England.
Because I think, and I don't know history very well, because I think part of the pushback came when the Kikuyu community was pushed out of the highlands and started to fight back.
So, and remember, and I wanted to put in something
Okay.
else. Sorry. Okay, Joram.
Okay, because that's a transition point now when there started to be a resistance, and it wasn't the only resistance movement in Africa. Resistance movements started building up where people started asking, why should we give up ours for this guy? Okay, and in those very same arrangements, there were people who were called collaborators. And collaborators cut across the board. We had Kikuyu collaborators, we had Kikuyu fighters, we had probably Kalenjin collaborators, Kalenjin fighters. Like it just depended on where the leaders sold out their people.
Yes. Yeah.
So all that began to happen, but the boundaries had already been done.
Yes.
So the fight now had to become a national fight. For if we are to get these guys who are pushing us out of our land out, it has to be out of the one country that we now have, which they decided.
Yes.
Okay. And there's this whole discussion also that, colonialism was becoming very expensive. And at some point, the colonialists needed to move out, but maintained control through the same mechanism of the local leaders. Okay? So get some 9 guys, bring them to Lancaster in the UK. Each of those 9 guys represent maybe the 9 largest communities or thereabout. And then you negotiate about how this handover is going to happen. Okay? There's a resistance, but I think it was just used as the excuse to finally say...
Actually, the sad part is this, and maybe this we'll discuss much later. It gets worse than what you're saying. Because even that fight and the eventual, should I say, freedom of Kenya, and then the buying back our land, and then redistribution of our land is part of the reason we have all this mess.
Okay,
I feel like distribution is probably episode 3.
Enter some 2 characters. Enter some 2 characters who are affecting us until today.
No, before you enter those characters, I know those guys.
No, because that's where they come in.
Before you put in those guys.
During that transition, that Odinga says, we are not accepting independence unless you let go of this guy. And then that's a story that we talk about until today.
No, there's more.
Please, before we go to the 2 guys. I was going to say, one of the means you use to subdue a native population is take the productive land, as you said, push them to the less productive land. You probably have some resistance. Some of them moved, did not fight, and so on and so forth. But then you introduce the very important technique of poll tax and hash tax.
Yes.
In other words, you
That's
say,
what I'm going to talk about.
for you to be able to, basically anybody who has a hut has to pay tax. And the tax has to be in Indian rupee, which we don't have because we don't live in a cash economy.
System of cash,
Right? So, because we don't have a cash economy, we have to give something to people who then will give us rupees for us to pay tax.
We have
which
to
is
work.
ridiculous. Exactly. So now you have people, and this is what it's really interesting because you still see that playing out today. So you have people who have been producers all these years because they have land, they have been farming, they have been selling their stuff. You push them out of land, you force them into wage labor. Because now for you to be able to afford,
And remember, that's not their culture.
Yeah.
That was never their culture.
so that they have to, so they can afford to pay
The tax.
the tax, they have to come and work in your farms. And they have to come and work in your farms for ridiculously
Low amounts of money.
low rates.
And then
And
because
then build
and
the
because
government
because they stopped working in their farms,
Yeah.
they
They're
now
not the
have to
producers.
work for a living
Yeah.
to buy food.
Yes. So you basically
because the question I keep asking myself, kwani Kenyans never used to eat before the
so
colonials?
so the thing is, so Joseph, the thing is, you push people from being producers in the sense of we are entrepreneurs
To laborers.
to laborers, and you push people from that production mode into a wage labor mode, and they become laborers. They work very hard for terrible portions of money. Put it down for terrible.
No, I want to contribute to what you're saying. Before you finish, Aki, please hold that
Okay,
thought.
okay, fine.
Do you know that is the same mode being used by our politicians right now? And that is why the laborer has to stay at the level he's at.
Poor.
Yeah.
Yes. All of them are doing the same thing. Continue.
I mean, you still see that now. People leave their farms in shags and move to the city to seek a job.
Exactly.
Because we have changed people's
That's our
mindsets from
culture.
being producers to laborers. You go to school, mwisho wa kusoma utapata
Kazi
nzuri
nzuri
sana.
sana.
In other words, you will be employed by somebody. So anyway, so you have that terrible shift, and now you introduce a cash economy, and now we all have to, work for the Indian rupee to pay this. And that's how then you manage to control people, because there's a chance that they could have moved, they could have refused to work for you. But the British couldn't afford to work in the large tracts of land that they had, so they needed poor, cheap labor. And that's how you end up getting cheap labor. And by these sort of colonial technologies, then you end up having both, very food and stuff produced very cheaply, but also you end up having a very subdued native population that has to look to you to be able to afford its life and to afford
so
the tax.
So you have a lot of wealth being generated for the colonialists.
Yes.
They've come, they've taken productive pieces of land, they've pushed people out.
And that is
but
how classes
the
are
local populations begin to resist and fight back.
Yes.
And that presents a problem because the British are overextended. They are trying to do this in 30 countries
Remember,
at the
the
same
sun
time.
never set on the British Empire. at
They
this point.
are overextended, and as everyone is fighting them from every side, they start to see this thing is we can't manage it anymore, because there's a myth that we fought for our independence and won,
Ooh,
No.
let's unpack
Before
that.
we get there, now
and that somebody
let me borrow-
fought for that independence
Let
to
me borrow from what she
kanyakua
says.
uhuru.
Let me borrow from what she says. Let me borrow from what
Nobody
she says.
can
certain
do
people
nyama.
Ideally,
So we natives
eh,
were able to fight off the white man with his guns and overwhelm him to the point that he says, "I need to leave."
Now,
Okay.
ideally, the land was to be fought for, captured back, redistributed,
To the people who owned it initially.
and not just that.
Yes.
Ideally, every Kenyan should have gone back to what we had, where everyone was empowered. But remember, the colonialist had disempowered the Kenyan to the point of laborers. Okay? So I think one of the sources of injustice in Kenya is where the politician failed to re-empower that Kenyan because he discovered if he re-empowers that
You
Kenyan,
can't control him.
he cannot control it. He basically became
Neo-colonialist.
what we call the neo-colonial.
Yes.
That's what actually
And that's,
neo-colonialism
and
is.
that, and that is a transition that I was talking about. Okay? Where power transitioned from one form of colonialist to the other. Only that these new colonialists look like one of our
Yes.
own.
Yes.
And so we thought, and to date still think, that he has our interests at heart.
Thank you.
When he's representing us at that level.
That is what is injustice. Now, master has stopped being the. Remember, the colonialists disempowered the Kenyan. The Kenyan now
Turned him into a slave,
yes,
virtually.
and the Kenyan now looks to the colonialists as
It's
master.
binding. Sorry.
Okay?
Okay? So what we did, we now changed masters. And to a point where we don't realize when they say tribe, when they say this, we basically go, yes, master. We don't think.
I'm a logical guy, so I'm trying to follow the trends here. Because I'm realizing a lot of things even as we talk here. And one of the big realizations is first, this is something I kind of realized when I was in campus, that the history we learned in primary and high school
Very economical.
was, first of
Very
all,
economical.
very skewed towards having a certain level of outcome, and certain aspects of the history we learn, we picked wholeheartedly from the colonialists to ourselves.
Yes.
Okay? And I've never understood
Their
why we
classification.
would believe that a British person discovered Lake Victoria. That for me, I don't understand. And until today, even on Wikipedia and all sorts of things, that kind of history stands, that all these physical features and all sorts of were discovered by the British. So that's one thing. So you learn a history that in a sense
But it's told
is
by the
skewed
victor,
towards
yeah.
one painting the colonialist as powerful, okay? Painting the African as a slave, as the guy who was subdued, who was dispossessed of everything, illiterate, native, and all sorts of things, you know, white savior, and then moves on to the whole question of now that power handing over to the neo-colonialist, the black savior, who is looking out for his interest, is supposed to carry out certain things to hand over power back to, but continues that system that was there, and continues to write a history that is also skewed in their favor. Yes. That Kenyatta is a hero, and the Lancaster 9 people, were they 9? Were heroes, and they went there to fight for our independence, and they were able to do it. And the Mau are, you know, all these sorts of things. I mean, I think, you know, there are stories of the Mau were betrayed immediately after independence, and there's all this false history, which is passed on to us in a very limited, skewed fashion. Because what I've always asked myself is that when the Mau were fighting, where were the Kalenjins, where were the Turkanas, the Pokots, the Samburus, everyone was, yeah. But that doesn't come out in the history. It doesn't come out in the history.
No, but even the betrayal of the so-called betrayal of the Mau is not in the history.
Yes, that's not in the history. How you
but
know,
this is the thing. This
the
is the
people
thing.
who fought alongside.
You mentioned that treated history, and you said the lack of power or something like that. But this is one thing that based on my exposure, we actually don't appreciate the power of oral history in Africa. Mm-hmm. This is how I say it. This is why I say this. No, no, you. He's told you about. They told me about the thing they did with the old the shosho. The Guka.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, that guy told them a lot of stuff. A lot, based on the Kikuyu history. I remember, I don't know whether we still have that tape. Us going to Shanks and my grandfather, who was then in his 90s, giving us the history of how the Kambas, the ranching, you know, that pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial ranching, the subdivisions, and bringing out a lot of truths that are hidden. The reason I say that is that there's a generation, if we are not careful, which is very rich in knowledge, will go. Because as I speak, both my granddads, from my dad's side and my mom's side, are gone. But those guys had a wealth of knowledge. I've gone to Meru, and I remember my granddad has told us stuff. I remember Kitambo in the early 90s, we'd sit down and he'd tell us stories of colonialism and things like that. My mom, who at some point, actually my mom's family, my mom actually got an infection in the camps, in the detention camps, because they were in the detention camp. Then she told me a lot of stories. Yeah. Now, that is what needs to go to the history books. And I wish you guys could. Okay, but you don't have.
I hear you, and I agree. We need to do so much more. Those of us who are academics must do much more to write this stuff. But also,
but the system that keeps the history as is the government.
It's the government.
Yes.
Why don't we have the Ministry of Education saying that we need to re-educate people so that people have an accurate sense that both good and bad happened in each tribe? There were collaborators, there were betrayers, there were people who fought, and have a balanced sense of history. Because one of the things that gives people entitlement today is to think we were the front runners in the fight towards us getting independence in this place which was carved out by these guys for their own reasons within tribes that we didn't define.
Yeah. I think
and yet we are willing to die for those tribes that we didn't define today.
Just looking at the way things are panning out now in like 2017. There's something that Rosa said. The colonialists came and they did their treaties and whatever and bunched us in different places. People who didn't want to stay together. My question is, how did we stay before? Yeah.
The thing is, we didn't have to interact as people of one
nation.
One nation.
Paying taxes to one pot, and then it's redistributed, and it doesn't come back to us.
For example, the nature of the Kamba community is because of their business, whatever.
Traders.
Yeah. Long distance. This we call
including slave trade, by the way, which we don't talk about.
Yes.
Okay? The nature of our trade is that there was interaction with different communities, but they maintained their authenticity. Same thing. There are tribes, if you ask, there are tribes that used to have there was barter between communities.
Yeah.
And you'd find, like I'm told, like you'd find places where a guy would speak Luo fluent and use Kale. And those guys would be used in trade and things like that.
Translators.
They were translators. So there was coexistence. It's just that
Even when there was war, there were rules of war.
Yes.
You kill our guy, you have to give us one guy.
Yeah.
You take our daughter, you have to come and take one of yours. There were rules around everything.
So
there were modes of governance and
They were more like international communities.
Yes.
Like we understand them now. So the same way that we trade with Uganda and Rwanda and so and Rwanda and so on, it's the same way communities traded with each other, but also waged war. As you said, there's a lot of raiding, between communities, particularly who are neighboring Maasais. I mean, you've heard about the raids between Maasais and Kikuyus, the raids, I think, between Maasais and Kambas. I know for sure there are raids between Maasais and Merus, and a lot of people.
There wars between Maasais and those I hear about Kales and Maasais.
Yeah, so I mean, so in that sense, you were not forcing people to live together as communities who completely identify as different nations, right? So that was, I think, partly the violence of the partition. And I hear you about the need to rewrite history. I don't know that necessarily the Ministry of Education is going to do it. It would be wonderful if they did it. But I think every critical sort of literature has to come from somewhere, and usually not from the dominant story. Because as you have said,
Academia.
Boom. Because as you said, there is an interest to be maintained by keeping a particular kind of narrative. So what people everywhere ought to start doing, people like myself and you and Johnny, for example, and using different sort of technologies, is to tell different
real stories. And because those narratives also evolved with the leaders.
Yeah.
During Kenyatta era, a certain narrative is painted. Moi comes in and we start singing Nyayo and Nyaism and all sorts of things, and that creeps into the curriculum. Then now we have Kibaki coming on board, and they try to erase some of the stuff that they don't want about Moi, protecting interests and all sorts of things. So when you have people clamoring to rewrite that history, you still have it being suppressed because people are afraid of people getting to know the truth. I remember becoming very disillusioned in university when I started to read alternative history of Africa, where stories were written by either Wazungus or just stuff that was not in our curriculum. And I started to discover very shocking things. Even about somebody like Kenyatta himself. He was in the UK for a while, but he was also in Russia, for quite a period of time. And something happened within that period, but typically he's painted as a capitalist guy and Odinga the communist, yet both of them had influences from both sides. Okay? And so there's just so much.
But Joram, you guys have sneaked in the two guys.
The two guys, we'll talk about them in detail, but the way that history has been painted and the way that transition happened continues to affect us today, because there are people who strongly believe in certain things today, which are not necessarily true.
You see Obama. Let me give you an example of Obama. Obama came to Africa to...
Please, use a specific country. Africa is like...
Okay.
Say that like
Kenya.
a Zungu. I'm going to Africa. Where?
Let's talk like Kenya is an island next to Africa.
It's in Africa, but
So,
it's Kenya.
Obama comes to Kenya, because actually I was going to say he went to Western Kenya, so I should have said he went to Nyanza.
Yes.
In 1982 strip, which he talks about in his book. The thing is, this guy actually came and researched his history. As in, he has a clear understanding of his history. Okay? And you said something. Academia. Me, I think, when it comes down to proverbially, when the rubber should meet the road is when we now say, Joram, go to your shags. Okay? Probably your grandparents are passed on. If they are alive.
And I have a very interesting point. We assume this history doesn't exist in a documented format. It actually does.
Not
It
always.
actually does. We are just not interested
Yes,
Finding out.
true.
So that
looking
is
at
both
it,
true and
repackaging it. I look at something
Exactly.
like the History Channel, which is an entire channel just dedicated to history in a different country. And they're always just regurgitating stories of one nature or the other, but telling the true story.
Yeah.
Why don't we have our own formats here of retelling the history from different points of view,
So I really
not
like that idea.
subduing the stories that people need to learn about their cultures going all the way back.
what I was saying is, the handover of power from colonialists to neo-colonialists, really, was you've set up these very hierarchical structures that are very good for dominating and subjugating a native population. You set up, a very strong sort of form of government. Now, the people who are to take over from power, I mean, they're just human beings. You find an amazing system that glorifies a person in power and completely subjugates a person, not in power. You absolutely take it. Makao Mojo has said in this really interesting book, Taming the Leviathan, I think, he talks about how all you really see at this point is a lowering of the Union Jack and the raising of the Kenyan flag, but it's the very same people, just a white skin, black skin. That's it.
And the myth there is that the black person is seeing his person
Yes.
getting into power and therefore has the hope that finally
Something is changing.
going to change because my person
Is in
has
power.
taken over
My
that
person is
system.
in power.
And
I'm
let me tell
on
you, the same thing happens to date.
Yeah.
If Raila was to take over power from Uhuru, and I'm going to say it openly, I don't think anything is going to change for the people on the ground. Because the same way the Kenyans expected that now that we have a Kenyan as president, things are going to change. And then the person at the top just ended up looking out for their own interests. Same thing happens to date. Okay? And maybe because of pressure, term limits and the like, they are forced to do certain things to keep people happy, which looks like development is spreading. But given a chance, they would keep the same system that Moi kept throughout.
Which will continue as we keep going. 30 seconds each.
Really?
30 seconds each to wrap up. Because listen, it's just for this
This one is
episode.
hard.
Okay, that's good.
It's just for this episode. Remember,
This thing cannot
we're
be
still-
wrapped.
Yeah, I'll say this. Let me start. 30 seconds. I think academia, I think anyone who is privy to the real history needs to start exposing it and bringing it to the top and helping Kenyans realize that they probably have beliefs that are built on foundations that are very shaky or false altogether. We need to start teaching the right history. We need to start opening up the minds and helping people criticize the system that they've grown up through so that we get to learn, do we really believe the right things? And even as we blindly follow our tribal leaders, are we really, when they tell us things, is that true? Okay? Is that really true?
I'm not ready. I'm not ready.
Same thing. Exposure. Read.
Dig deeper.
Dig deep. Question. For me, the one thing I've learned is read, question, try understand, have an open mind. Ask yourself. Even the Bible says, ukiona everyone is agreeing with you, there's a problem. Yeah. So the thing is,
It does.
the place where
That Malki had sing
you know
Bible.
that for you're told when the world loves you, there's a problem because the world should hate you because of me. So the question is, why do they hate you? Because you have certain principles, certain ways of things, certain schools of thought, certain ways of living. So if you live like them, they love you. It's the same thing. That exposure needs to be there. Opening yourself up to learning and shutting yourself to all those voices. All those voices that are saying, this guy did this or did it. Because again, the question is, which is what we asked ourselves the last time. Which guys have benefited? There are specific guys. Not everyone. So why do we keep lying to ourselves? Like that narrative of, oh, these guys have benefited, is a really stupid thing.
All right.
Yeah. I think, okay, so I don't even know which conversation we're wrapping up, but I have a few thoughts. Historical injustice conversation we have to deal with the real history of the political struggle, of the independence struggle. There's more than one story, right? We need to deal with that. And then we need to deal with the very difficult, 63 to, I guess, 2010 or 2017 narrative. But I was going to agree with Jose and with Joram that alternative history is important, or that we need to talk about those things. And I don't even think that it's only academics who need to do that. I think Everybody
Everyone.
needs to be doing this, and this can be artists, all right? Because artists have an amazing way of telling this stuff. Musicians, caricaturists.
Yes.
I mean, Gado, for many, many years, Gado was civil society in his
Yeah,
capacity.
And need to realize.
You have entered my 30 seconds.
Very fast.
This is Rosa's.
This is Rosa's
Your
30
points are always
seconds.
very powerful.
Well, thank you very much, Joram. So, but I think we all ought to be activists. I think we all ought to be activists. We all ought to be activists about our history.
And us questioning that empowers us to develop ourselves to be better.
Regardless of your
Please don't leave me
tribalism.
hanging.
I
Yes.
totally agree.
30 seconds.
I agree with you, and I think even the fact that the three of you are parents, I'll be one soon. The three of your parents, this thing needs to start from the house.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot. There's a lot we keep saying academia. Let's leave it to the schools, but this thing starts from the home.
I want to say something about the home and my children.
Which means all this nonsense you taught about the other tribe and their history
Starts from the home!
starts from the home.
Yes, but
That's
beyond
where the
that,
problem
but
begins.
beyond that, if you're decolonizing people's history,
My
if you're
30 seconds.
decolonizing people's history and you're decolonizing minds, you have to start decolonizing your children's minds.
Yes.
I have to say something. So yesterday I went to the bookstore, right? And my children are 3 and 4.5, and I was buying books, and usually you will buy Disney classics and Ladybird stories and blah. Yesterday I was looking for No Feast for Kyundu. Have you guys read that?
Yes.
No Feast for
Yeah.
Kyundu. Crocodile stories, and I bought those books. And part of the reason I like them, apart from the hairs and so on, is that they have children who look like my children. They are black, they have cornrows or matutas, and that's very powerful for my children to begin to see themselves in the stories that they read, so that they can begin to think that all stories in the world are not about blue-eyed, blonde-haired princesses. They're actually about girls who look like me, who are out there having adventures. I just think that it's important that we put our own children
it goes back to us
inside
having
those conversations.
Animators who do cartoons
Yes.
that are Africa-centric,
Yes.
that are Kenyan-centric, that are
See,
like,
Oh,
don't
that's
get me
sound.
started.
invest in something like
Don't
that.
get me started.
So, I mean, the fact that the stories needs to start from the house, from home, making this like just empowering the children to be able to know where they come from, what they're going into, especially the fact that we're already in a very, as we say, convoluted society, a place where everyone is looking at this top person to the savior to help us, and yet they're not really helping, which I've actually just realized right now that we're just being colonized by the same person. Someone different, and just I'm sure if they did that, the Matrix thing, and just did this, a white guy would face off. A white guy would just pop up from there. Anyway, thank you very much, guys. I mean, we'll still continue this conversation. I was told I don't have a powerful ending. I need a powerful ending.
It's okay.
Yes.
Let me tell you, the point is to pass the message.
Anyway, the message has been passed. Guys, we need to talk. Guys, we need to research. Guys, we need to question. We need to be empowered. But we cannot be empowered by thinking that someone else is going to do the work for us. Someone once told me we need to be intentional. And you need to be intentional about knowing your history, be intentional about knowing where you come from, what the people around you, and let's also be intentional to love, like for the
To love?
love.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Because I mean, let's not wait for 5 years to just fight again.
No. We'll forget our fights, then we'll love for like 3.5 years. Then election will come, then we'll forget we usually love. That's what happened.
Anyway, thank you very much. See you next week as we continue to unpack, because this one is going to be
a lot of stuff. It's
This is
A lot of luggage.
and there's a lot of baggage for unpacking. So please, again, comment down here. Hapa chini. Yeah, it's just me and Jose. The two have empowered us here, and we are trying to...
Can you see my finger?
So thank you very much. See you next week. Same time, same place.